Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Simon, and in this video I'm going to cover the Unix Administration grade lab called Network File System, or NFS. And NFS is pretty neat, because imagine your teacher comes up to you and says, hey, you've got a project that's due at the end of the term, and it's probably going to require about 100 gigabytes of storage space. You might look at your laptop and be like, crap, I don't have that, because everything on your computer is important files, so you can't even delete some to make room for it. And you're a student, so you can't just go to Best Buy and buy a hard drive whenever you need. So you're going to be in a pretty tough spot. What you can do is, if let's say you go home, you connect to your home network, and you've got family that have computers of their own and they're connected to the same network. Imagine your mom, for example. Imagine she's on the home network, and you know your mom has 1 terabyte of storage. So she's got 1 terabyte of storage space that is probably mostly not used, because you're going to say, my mom just plays solitaire. She very rarely uses the computer anyway, and it's got 1 terabyte. So I'm guessing that she's probably used less than 60 gigabytes, which means there's a ton of storage space that I can use. Well, NFS will allow you to basically make a directory on her computer that only you can access. So no one else on the network will have access except for you. She won't even have access. And now you can use all that space that your mother's not using on her PC to help you out, because you can put files that are important to you into that directory. And like I said, it's secure. No one has access to it. So if there's all these important files on your laptop that you can't get rid of, you can actually put it into this directory, so you've got a safe place for it, and that will give you room so that you can put whatever you need to in this 100 gigabyte project. So it is really, really cool. It basically gives you your own little FTP server, and it's kind of neat. So NFS can be really, really useful. The problem is that this lab is really, really difficult, because there's a lot to do, and there's a lot that you can easily mess up if you don't do it right. So I always tell you to make sure you do the practice lab and the grade lab before watching the videos. This is a lab that's past due, so you're not going to get your marks if you hand it in now, but I wanted to make this video and go over this lab so I can show you exactly what to do, how to think about things, how to understand why we're doing what we're doing, so that when you actually do your test that's coming up, not the first one, but the second and third test, you'll understand NFS really good, and hopefully you'll get an amazing grade on your tests. So with that being said, let's begin. We'll start with part A, and we're going to set up the lab by basically importing fresh copies of the W01 and S01 virtual machines. So go into VirtualBox. If you have these virtual machines in there from a previous lab, just delete them. We don't need them. We want fresh copies. So hit delete all files. Click on File, Import Appliance, find your OVA file on your computer, open it, click Next, and then use whatever settings you want. Basically, it doesn't matter. These are good enough settings. They're sufficient. But if you're using a Mohawk College computer, what I would say is, for the W01 virtual machine, just change the CPU number from 1 to 2, and change the RAM from 1024 to 2048. Everything else is fine. And when you're happy with your settings, click Import and just wait for it to import. And while it's importing, what I would say is make sure you have this DVD ISO image ready to go, because like we did in the last two labs, you're going to install things on S01, and S01 does not have any internet connection. So when it's looking to install files, it needs somewhere to look, and this DVD image is exactly where it needs to find everything that it needs to install. So make sure you have it ready, because we are going to definitely be using this. So now that my virtual machines are ready to go, I'm just going to start them. Feel free to start them. If you don't have a great computer, then start them one at a time so you don't slow down your machine. If you've got a good computer, go ahead and start them both at the same time. And while they're loading up, what we're going to do first is install the NFS utilities on all systems. So we're going to do it on both W01 and S01. And I'm going to start with W01 because W01 has an internet connection, so it's going to be easy to use. You should know by now that yum install is probably what you're going to use most of the time, and with W01 having an internet connection, we don't even have to mount that DVD ISO. We can just basically use the internet to get the NFS utilities installed. So go ahead and click on Alice and log in. There we go. And click on Applications, click on System Tools and Terminal. And make sure you're signed in as root, so switch user or SU and type in the password of admin pass. And now we're root, and now we're going to say yum install, and we just have to know what it's called. If you just say yum install NFS, you might not get exactly what you need. So make sure you go into the practice lab, because you're going to see that what we should be actually typing in is yum install NFS utils. So that's what I'm going to do right now. NFS -utils. And this is going to load, and because it's coming from the internet, it's going to be a little bit slower than if you use the DVD, but it's not too bad. It doesn't take that long. Just sit there and wait for it, and it will eventually give you the prompt. There we go. So just say yes, and it will install, and that's all you have to do for W01 for now. So we can move on to S01, log in as root. And remember, we do not have an internet connection. So the first thing we're going to do is, first of all, ask VirtualBox to make the DVD image accessible to Linux. So we're going to click on Devices, click on Optical Drives, and click on the CentOS ISO. If it's not there for you, then you can choose Disk Image and you can find it. And once you find it, just open it. But once you see that it's got that check mark, that means VirtualBox is letting Unix or Linux use it if it wants. But it still hasn't used it, and I know that it hasn't mounted it properly, because if I type in df, we can see it's not mounted. So we have to manually mount it by typing in mount /dev/CD-ROM. And we didn't get any errors, so that means it worked, but just in case, type in df again, and you'll see the CentOS DVD is there finally. So now we should be able to successfully install the NFS utilities, and we'll do that right now by typing in yum install NFS-utils, hit enter, and this is a lot quicker, so say yes, and there we go, it's all installed. So we can move on to the next part, or the next step, and that's 3. It says make sure NFS is set to start automatically on S01. So we learned how to do this in the last lab. How we're going to do this is we're going to use check config the service name, and then we're going to say on. Now you might try to say NFS-utils, because that's what we typed in when we were using yum install, but that won't work, and I'll show you why. If you say check config -- list and you look at the list of services installed on this virtual machine, the list is in alphabetical order, you'll see that there is no NFS utils, there's just NFS. So when we use that command, we're just going to say check config NFS on. And remember, when we make sure that it's basically going to automatically start on boot up, we want to make sure that 0, 1 are off, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are on, and 6 is off. So right now all of them are off, so it's not working. So we have to make sure we put that command in. So I'm just going to clear it. I'm going to say check config NFS on. We didn't get any errors, so that's good. And then I'm going to just check it to make sure that it worked. So go down to NFS, we see 0 and 1 are off, that's perfect. 2, 3, 4, and 5 are on, that's perfect, and 6 is off. So that's exactly what we want. That is what you need to make sure you have if you ever get a question or a task that says make sure this service automatically starts on boot up. So we've done that. We can move on to number 4, and it says create users on W01 and S01, making sure they have consistent UID numbers. So this is not really complicated, because this is something that you've done in your users and groups lab, which is the second lab, I think, of the actual course. So this should be very easy for you to do, and once you've done that, we're just going to create a group called accounting and make sure Bill and Carlos go in accounting. So this is very, very simple stuff, but here's the problem. With NFS, when you have an account or a user, you have to make sure that the computer that you're using NFS with has the same name for the user and the same UID. So I'll give you an example. On S01, we just have root. That's it. But on W01, we have Alice. As you can see, we have Alice here. So if I say this, cat etc password, we can see that I have Alice as 500. But if I go to SO1 and I say cat etc password, I don't have Alice down here as 500. So if I don't put this in correctly, if I don't put the command in to put Bill Gates in there correctly, Bill Gates could potentially end up getting the UID of 500. And that's going to be bad, because what will happen is WO1 is going to be like, hey, I would like to use your file service, your NFS directory. And SO1 is going to be like, yeah, that's cool. Who are you? And then you're going to come back here and just say, hey, I'm Alice, and my UID is 500. And SO1 is going to say, I don't have Alice as 500. I have Bill as 500. I don't trust you. You're not going to be able to access this. And then it's not going to work. So what I would suggest you do, because it's only one account, it's just Alice, I would suggest that you put Alice in SO1 even though it doesn't tell you to do that. You don't have to. I'm going to show you what you can do to make sure that you don't have that issue going forward, but I do think that it makes things easier down the road. So when I go to SO1, I'm going to add Alice right now. And how we do that is we say user add. We're going to say Alice -m, and I'm not going to make a comment to put her full name because it doesn't matter, but I am going to say -u 500, and that's the way that you can specify what UID you want. So when it comes to Bill and Carlos, you can use any UID you want as long as it's not already taken, but for the sake of this, I'm just going to make sure Alice is there so that we know nothing's going to automatically be taken with the 500 UID by accident. So I'm going to hit enter, and now if I say cat etc password, if I go to the bottom, we now see Alice and we see 500. So that's exactly what we see down here. So that is no longer going to conflict with us anymore, and we shouldn't have any issues moving forward. Now we can add Bill Gates and Carlos Slim. So let's do that on WO1 first. What I'm going to do is add these guys, make the group accounting, and add them to the accounting group, and then we'll do it on SO1 again. So let's clear this. And this is stuff you should already know because, like I said, this was in users and groups, the second lab of the course. We're just going to say user add. We're going to say Bill. We're going to put a comment in for the full name, which is Bill Gates. We'll put -m. And then just for the safety of it, we're going to say -u, which is the UID. And we're going to specify he's going to be 501. And now let's do 502. Instead of Bill Gates, we're going to say Carlos Slim. And let's change the username to Carlos. Perfect. Now let's add that group. So we're going to say group add. And we're going to call it accounting. And now we're going to add each of these people to accounting. So we're going to say G password -a Bill accounting. And then G password -a Carlos accounting. Perfect. So everything should be good to go. So what we'll do is just clear this, say cat etc password, hit enter, and we can see Alice is 500, Bill is 501, and Carlos is 502. Let's do all of this again on SO1. So we're going to say user add, we're going to say Bill, and we're going to say -c for comment, and we'll put his full name in there, -m, -u, so we can specify his UID so that there's no mistakes. We're going to say 501. Do the same thing for 502 for Carlos Slim. And then change the username to Carlos, hit enter, that should work. Group add, and then we're going to, let's say, add counting, and then we're going to say G password -a Bill accounting, G password -a Carlos accounting, and we are done. Okay, so let's just make sure everything's right. We're going to say cat etc and password, and we can see Alice is 500, Bill is 501, and Carlos is 502. So that's all correct, but we're going to check something else, because this could have messed up, and it is very possible, so you have to do this. I want you to switch user to Bill, and then type in ID. And what you're going to see is, here in groups, we're going to see there's a 501, which is group Bill, and 503, which is accounting. make sure it's the same on SO1 as well, because that is really important. So we're going to clear, we're going to switch user to Bill and ID, and our groups say 501, which is Bill, and 503, which is accounting. So that syncs up, which is perfect. Let's do it for Carlos as well. So we'll exit, switch user to Carlos, ID, same thing up here, exit, switch user to Carlos, ID, and we can see the groups that Carlos has is 502 Carlos and 503 accounting. And on SO1, it's the same thing, 502 Carlos and 503 accounting. So everything synced up. We had everything perfect for part A. We can finally move on to part B. So good job if you got this far. Let's go down here. Make sure we exit from Carlos because we don't want Carlos. We want root for the next few things that we're going to do. All right. So now that we are root on both of them, we can move to part B, which is creating the Scratch share. So what we have to do is create a directory called nfs_shares Scratch on both W01 and SO1. And it's going to basically go on SO1, so we're going to use SO1's storage. And everyone on W1 is going to be able to have access to it. So everyone on W1 should be able to read and write. And the root on W1 should have the same amount of access as the root of SO1. So I'm going to show you how to do that, and then we're going to test our work. So let's first start on SO1. What we're going to do is we are going to create the directory. So make a directory p nfs share and Scratch. Perfect. So we have this now. What I would suggest right out of the gate is I want you to change the permissions because everyone should be able to read it and write. So a lot of people forget this, and that's why it doesn't end up working for them. They think, oh, you know, we have to, the next step is updating the exports file, and then we have to reboot the system, and then we have to go into W01 and we have to basically create a new mounting folder, and we have to put in fstab, and that's it. And it's like, no, you still have to make sure the permissions are right. So we're going to put permissions on there, which is chmod 777 and then nfs shares Scratch. And now we can edit the exports folder. So we're going to say vi etc exports. And right now it's blank, and that's okay because we don't have any entries yet. But what we can do is make an entry. So how we're going to do this is hit I to insert and put in nfs_shares Scratch space W01 because we want W01 to have access to this folder now. And then you're going to have to put in brackets RW for read write because you want them to have read write and access. And then you're going to say no_root_squash. And you're going to say, what does that mean? Because you saw root squash, you've seen no root squash. I think there's all root squash. So there's a bunch of these, and you're going to say, I don't know what this means. And I'll try to explain as easy as I can. Root has access to do everything. So if you're root, you can basically do whatever you want on the system. You could remove every single file in the system if you want. Root is a dangerous thing to have. But every system seems to have a root, right? SO1 has root and W01 has root. So imagine if SO1 has a folder that W01 can access, and W01 accesses that folder as the root of W01. Well, what do you do with that? Because now SO1 is going to say, oh, root is coming in here. Do we give them the ability to do whatever they want? That's the question. So if you say no root squash, what that means is let them do whatever they want. If they come in as root, let them be root. Let them have the same access as SO1's root. So W01's root will be equal to SO1. We're not going to squash the root of W1's privileges. We're going to let him be the same as SO1's root. So that's what no root squash means. If you see just root squash, that means don't let W01's root be the same as SO1's root. If root of W01 comes into SO1, prevent him from having these privileges or these permissions. So in this case, because it says to us that Scratch says that root should have the same level access to the share as SO1, then we want to make sure that we're saying no root squash. So if you put this in, this is perfect. So all you have to do is save it and get out. Now the next thing that we want to do is reboot the system. So if you go to your practice file, you're going to see that I've kind of done things out of order, but this is the best order to do it because we've basically created the directory, we have updated the exports to what we need. It's going to be different than this because we have different requirements. And then it says we have to put this in, which we already did. We've already made sure it automatically starts on boot up. And now we just have to restart. So that's all we're going to do. So shut down, restart now, and let it restart. So once it comes back up, we can check our work just to make sure everything's good. And once it's good, we can move on to W1, where we're basically going to make a mounting point and then make that mounting point in the fstab file so that it'll basically mount properly and we can access that share. So let's just wait for SO1 to do its thing. It is back. Let's sign in. And very quickly, let's say export fs-v. And that just shows you what's working right now. So we can see the nfs_shares/scratch directory can be accessible from W1, and we know that it can read and write. I did not put wdelay in there, or whatever it is. I don't know what it is, to be honest with you, and don't worry about it because you don't need to know. It's just going to automatically populate if you don't do it. And then in terms of the no root squash, I put that in there, so that's working. And then same thing with no subtree check. I didn't put that in there. It auto-populated. I don't know what it does, but don't worry about it for your course. You don't have to worry. So that's good. Everything seems to be fine. We can now move on to the W01 machine and get this all going. So we are still root, and that's perfect. We're going to make a new directory. And it doesn't really tell us what the directory should be called, so I'm just going to call it the exact same thing because that's what it looks like it wants. So let's just play it safe and say nfs share scratch, but you don't have to. You can change the name, you can call it whatever you want. That's okay. It doesn't have to be the same name. This is just going to be the folder on W1 that we're going to use to access the folder on SO1, so it does not have to match. We'll say enter. Now let's put it into the fstab file, which is etc/fstab. I call it fstab. I think it's actually fstab, file system tab, but whatever. And let's go down and make a new entry. And the new entry is going to look like this. SO1, so it's going to say go to SO1 and go to this directory on SO1. So it's nfs shares scratch. Then make sure that that directory is accessible on this virtual machine through the nfs shares folder, again on W01. I'll explain that in a second again. In terms of the file system we're using, it's nfs. You can leave this as defaults, and don't worry about the numbers. They're just checksums, but you don't have to worry about that. And that's it. So I'll tell you what I did. Basically, the first part of this is saying we are going to access the nfs shares scratch folder on SO1, and how we're going to be able to access it is by going to the nfs shares scratch folder on W01. So when I click on this folder, it's going to access the folder on SO1. And then nfs is the file system we're using. Don't worry about defaults. It's just basically saying it's going to load when it loads, and these numbers are just checks that you don't have to worry about. So when you're good, you can save, basically quit out of there. And I got that again from this practice lab, so you can see it right here. I'm just following it almost to a T. So now that that's there, what we can do is mount it. So if you want, you can say mount, and you can put that whole thing in there if you want, or you can just say mount A, whatever you want. But I'm just gonna do it the way that they want us to do it. So there we go. It's all mounted. It's all good to go. We have the permissions there. So what we're going to do is try to write files into that folder. So this gets a little tricky because sometimes you need to wait for it to load. Even though it's mounted, sometimes it takes some time to actually do everything properly. So if you write a file and it looks like it's hanging there, just wait some time. If it seems to take a lot of time, go ahead and close the terminal and try it again. But just because it doesn't work right away does not mean that it's not working or that you did something wrong. So let's try it. What I'm going to do is in W01, I'm going to act as root. So I'm root right now. And I'm going to echo I am root into NFS shares, scratch, and I'm going to call it root.txt. Looked like it worked. We had no errors, so I'm just going to now assign into Bill. So let's go switch user to Bill and echo I am Bill and direct that into NFS shares, scratch, and we'll call it bill.txt. I didn't get any errors, so that looks like it's good. So let's switch the user. Let's say exit, and then switch user to Carlos, and echo I am Carlos, and redirect it into the same folder. We'll call it carlos.txt. Okay, so I'm going to exit. I'm back to root, clear, and if I go to SO1, I should be able to do this. Clear, list everything in that NFS folder, scratch. And look at that. We can see Bill, Carlos, and root have all text files in here. So everything was successful. So if you did what I just did, you should be successfully completing Part B right now. So now that we've done that, we can move down to create an accounting share. So what it wants us to do is create and export a directory named NFS shares / accounting that is accessible only to the members of the accounting group. Okay, so it says neither root or Alice on W1 should be able to access the share. So that's really important. So right there, we know that W1 should not be able to have root have access to it. So instead of saying no root squash, we're going to say root squash. Okay, because we don't want W1 to have access. Both Carlos and Bill must be able to create and delete files on the share. Perfect. When members of the accounting group create files on the share, the file group ownership must be set to accounting automatically. Hint, Google set UID bit on the directory. So this is what we're going to do. This is where people get very confused on this as well. Go to SO1 and let's first make the folder. So make drive NFS accounting. Okay, so we made accounting, but remember, what do we have to do when you want the group to own this directory only? We have to do chown, and we're going to say root, and we're going to say the accounting group, and then we're going to name the directory. So I don't know if you remember that. There we go. But that is something that we had to do in users and groups. When we wanted to make sure that a file is owned by a group and only people in the group have access to it, you have to make sure you type in chown and then change the group to whatever the group it's supposed to be, in this case accounting, and then make sure you put the file in there, or sorry, the folder in there, so that it knows which folder is going to be owned by accounting, so that that is going to help us with our permissions. But that's not going to prevent people from accessing accounting right away. What we have to do is change mod and say 2770, and then you're going to say NFS shares accounting. And now what that's going to do is say, okay, look, anyone that's part of the accounting group will have the ability to use this folder, anyone else will not. And every time someone creates something in this folder, it's going to be showing up as accounting. So that's exactly what you want to do. chmod 2770, that 2 is what he means by set UID bit. Okay, so there we go. We just created the permissions. Now it's time to put it into the exports file. So we're going to say vi, let's go back into SO1, vi etc exports. We see this line is already in there because we did that before. So let's make a new line. I'm going to say NFS shares accounting W01, and they're allowed to read write, but we're going to say root squash. And let me just make sure that that's all we want to do, because I think that we don't want to do anything else. You know what? We don't even have to do the root squash, because root isn't part of that group. So we don't even have to worry about that. We just have to say read write. So that is something else, is because we have the group own that folder, and root of W01 is not part of that group. It doesn't matter. We don't even have to say root squash. We can just leave it as RW, and that's fine. So we can save this now. And now that we saved it, what we're going to have to do is reboot again. Because if you go back here, remember that once you've done this, you just have to restart it every single time. So let's do it. Shut down. Now let it reboot. It doesn't take too much time. And then what we're going to do is go back into W1 and do the same thing that we did before. Make a new mounting point, put it in the FS tab, or the F tab as I like to call it, and then mount it, and then see if we can do what we want to do. So let's just wait. Okay, so let's root, log in, say export fs-v, and there we go. We have both of these ready to play. And as you can see, remember how I told you I didn't even have to put in root squash, it's just going to put it in there? It did. So all you had to do is put RW, it'll fill in the rest for you, and it automatically assumes a root squash. So that's a little helpful hint, is that if you don't want to put no root squash, you don't even have to put it, it'll automatically populate. So this is good. Let's go into W1 and let's just fix up a mounting point and get this all ready. So we're already root. So let's say make directory p/NFS shares accounting. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to not change its permissions or anything like that. We're just going to straight add it to the FS tab, which is vi etc fs tab, and make a new point. So once again, it'll look very similar. SO1 NFS shares accounting, NFS shares accounting. And I said this in a previous video, but you don't have to make sure that they line up perfectly. As long as there's spaces in between each thing, it'll recognize what it's supposed to be. So don't worry if this doesn't look pretty. Do your best, but don't stress about it. And there we go. So let's just save that, and now let's mount it. Okay, it's now mounted. So this is where we're going to see if this works, because what we have to make sure is that Alice and root cannot do anything with this folder, but Carlos and Bill should. So we are going to expect that there's going to be some permission denied, and some things that don't work. That's normal as long as it's for root and Alice. But Bill and Carlos should have no problem. So let's try with root first. Echo I am root into NFS shares accounting, and we'll call it root.txt. Permission denied. So that didn't work, and that's perfect. We want that. Now we're going to say switch user to Alice, and let's say echo I am Alice, and we're going to redirect that into NFS shares accounting, and this should not work. Perfect, it didn't work. So now you're going to have anxiety because you're like, oh my god, I hope it works for Bill and Carlos. So let's exit. Let's go switch user to Bill, say echo I am Bill, put that into NFS shares accounting bill.txt, and this is for all the marbles. Hit enter. It worked. There we go. Okay, let's exit and let's try Mr. Carlos. say echo I am Carlos. You're going to redirect that into NFS, shares accounting, we'll call it carlos.txt. And for all the marbles, it entered and it worked. And we know it worked because if we go into SO1 and we cat NFS shares accounting, we can see, oh, even root doesn't have access. You're going to be like, well, how do I check now, right? Well, just check here. Cat NFS shares and accounting. Sorry, I shouldn't say cat. Getting myself confused. LS. There we go. It's all there. And you could do it with SO1 as well. You can just say switch user to Bill, and then you can say ls NFS accounting, and it will work as well. Because just remember that when it comes to both these machines, they both have a Bill and they both have a Carlos, and they're both in the accounting group, so they're synced. So you could do it here as well. So everything is working exactly the way we want to. So part C is a success. So now we're going to do part D, and this is the part where it's a little bit complicated, because what he wants you to do is he wants you to basically have a folder called pub, and he says it's a public playground share. And he says it's a little different. He wants all users, including root, on W1 must have full access. So you're going to be like, okay, well, that's exactly what we did here. No big deal. But then it says all users must appear as the user W1 guest when performing operations on the share. That's where it's new. That's where you're going to be like, what? What are we doing? How does this work? I don't get it. So this is what we're going to do. W1 guest does not exist currently. It's not a user. So let's make it a user. So let's go into SO1 first. You know what? Let's exit. Make sure we're root. Clear. And let's go to W1 because I did everything from W1 first. So let's just exit Carlos and make sure we're root. And let's make a new account. So we're going to say user add, and we're going to call it W1 underscore guest. And if you want, we can make a comment. You don't have to, but you can say W1 guest, and we can say M and then dash U, and we can do whatever number we want. Remember how I told you that I was going to make it simple, and I did 500 and then 501, 502, 503. When you say dash U, you can make whatever number you want. So for example, I could say 550. Okay, and if I enter, all I have to do is make sure that when I do it on SO1, I use the same 550. So let's do that. We're going to say user add W1 underscore guest and C W1 guest MU 550. All right, perfect. So what we can do now is let's just switch our user to W1 guest. And there I am. If I say ID, look at what I have. My groups are 550 W1 guest, and that's it. That's all I have. So my GID is W1 guest, my UID is W1 guest, they're 550, so that's okay. So let's go here and see if it's the same. So what we're going to do is sign in as W1 guest and hit enter. Okay, and what we're going to do is just see if our ID matches. So groups 550 W1 guest, UID 550 W1 guest, so that looks the exact same. So everything is really good there. Now it just says it has to show up as user W1 guest, but we can also make a group W1 guest just to make it as, you know, foolproof as possible. So let's do that. So let's go clear. Let's say group add W1 guest and see if that will work. Permission denied. So we can't, oh, well, I'm not root, so I apologize. Let me exit this and let's try it again. Okay, That's what I was expecting. W01 guest, because it's already a username, we can't use it as a group, so that's okay. I just wanted to see if that would work, but it doesn't look like that will work, and that's fine. That's all we need. So let's just clear this, and let's clear this, and let's start making our folder, and you're going to see how things are a little bit different. So what we're going to do is make a drive on here, and it's going to be under NF shares, and it's going to be called pub for public. Then I'm going to chmod 777, and let me think. Hold on one second. Let me just think. What I'm going to do is 2777, just in case. Okay, so we're going to say 2777, and we're going to say the NFS shares pub. The reason why I'm doing that 2777 is I want to make sure that when it's W01 guest, that it populates that guest as the group as well. Okay, so everyone that is going to populate is going to show both the NFS guest for the username and the owner and the group. Okay, so that's why I did 2777, but I should have done chown first. So chown, we're going to say root W01 guest NFS shares pub, and okay, that's fine. So you can do that. I usually like doing it in the middle. I like doing it before I'm actually changing permissions, but hopefully that's not going to impact this, but we'll see. But it should be fine. I didn't get any errors, so it should be all good. But now that we have that, now we can basically go through our exports file, and let's add a new entry. So when it comes to this new entry, what we're going to do is we're going to say NFS shares pub, and then we're going to say W01, which is fine, and everyone's got to have read-write access, so that's good. But now what I'm going to say is all squash, okay, because I want to make sure no one is going to be able to write to this with their own name. I don't want root to write. I want even the root of SO1 to basically change. Whoever writes into this, I want to change their name to W1 guest. I don't want anyone to have the ability to own anything. So if I say all squash, that means don't just squash root of W1, squash root of SO1 as well. But we're not done there, because what we need to do now is we have to do this. We have to say a non-UID. So that means what ID are we going to be using if no one's going to be able to own this? Who is going to show up? What's the name? And we're going to say 550 because we want it to be W1 guest. So that's normal. And then when it comes down to a non-GID, we should be able to use 550 as well. So let's do that. Now you're going to say, well, what's a non-GID? So a non-GID is the group ID, and a non-UID is basically the user ID. So we're going to put both these in so that basically it shows up as W1 guest. I don't think they want the group to be anything special. They just want to make sure that all the users appear as W1 guest. So as long as we get the non-ID or UID here, that should be sufficient. So go ahead and save that. Alright, and as you know, once you save that, the only thing left to do is reboot. So shut down R now, and we will wait. So this one's a little bit different. This is something that I had to research, but basically what I found is if you want to make sure that everyone shows up as one person, you have to create that person, and then you have to go into the exports file and say all squash, so everyone basically gets their ID taken away from them if they create a file in this folder, and it's going to use what's called a non-UID as the user ID, and then a non-GID as the group ID of whatever you want to put. So in this case, if Root or Alice or anyone posts in here, they can, but it's going to show up as W01_guest. So let's sign into SO1. There we go. And let's just make sure that everything is working the way we want. So we've got all three of these guys ready to go. So let us just minimize this. Let's go here and let's exit. We're root now. Let's make the new directory that we need, which is going to be NFS shares pub. Okay, let's put it into the FS tab or fstab. You guys should know how to do this by now. It's probably second nature to you by now. There we go. And then of course we want to mount it. So let's mount it. And there we go. So now what we're expecting is that anyone is going to be able to access this and anyone is going to be able to basically post whatever they want. The problem is that when they do, they're going to not have their name shown when we see the file. It's going to show that it is basically W01 guest. So hopefully we did it right. Hopefully it comes up the way that we want. Otherwise, I'm going to have to redo this entire video, and that's going to suck. Alright, so it says all users must appear as W01 guests when performing this operation. Basically, I think what we want to do is just make sure that every user attempts to try something in this folder. It doesn't say so, but I think that when it actually does the grading, it's going to see if there's a basically a text file from every single user. So we're root. Let's just try this. We're going to say echo I am root and put that in NFS pub root.txt. We had no problem with that. So let's sign in as Alice now. And let's say echo I am Alice. We'll put that in NFS shares pub alice.txt. We had no problem with that. So let's exit and sign in as Bill. And we'll say echo I am Bill and NF shares pub bill.txt. Exit, sign in as Carlos. Say echo I am Carlos. NFS shares pub carlos.txt. And everything seemed to work, but we weren't really concerned about that. We were more concerned about how the files look if we look into the actual share. So I can exit and we can clear. And let's do it on SO1 just to be dramatic. So make this guy big, clear this. I'm root, so what I'm going to do is say ls-l, and we're going to say NF shares pub. Look at that. That's exactly what we wanted. We wanted to make sure that W01 guest owns everything. So you see how Alice, Bill, Carlos, and Root are all here? We have W01 guest on each of these, and that's exactly what we wanted. So everything works. That is how you do this entire lab. I hope this really helped. I hope this really helps. If you are wondering about anything that I've done, feel free to let me know. For example, you're going to be like, I don't understand. What's this? What I can show you is, let's try another one. Let's try the scratch. If I went to NFS shares scratch, what you'll see is when Bill creates something, it shows that Bill created it. When Carlos created something, it shows Carlos created it. When Root did it, it shows Root. So what we did here was we just said that the user and the group was W01 guest, so it hides who owns these files. I suppose before I let you go, I should run the grading script just to show you so that you feel more confident that everything was done right. So let's go into W01 and do that. So let's go here. And we will wait to get eLearn loaded up. And that's going to be pretty much all there is after this, because I'm going to take a break from making videos. But if you have any questions, like I said, just let me know. I know this one was a little bit weird because you do have to follow this, but I find that the practice lab has some things where you do things up here and you forget that there's stuff down here you have to do before it'll work. So you kind of just have to know the flow of it. Once you know the flow of it, it's easy, but again, you have to do it so many times to finally figure it out. And it wasn't something that I remembered right away. So if you feel like you're struggling with it, don't worry, I get that. But like I said, as you can see, if you follow this video, you could easily get everything working the way you want it to. It just takes a little bit of thought. So we're here at Dropbox. Let's get our NFS host file, save it to downloads. There we go. Let's go into downloads, SCP that file to root of SO1 in the temp folder, admin pass. That's good. Now we can go to SO1. We can go into temp. Oh, sorry. There we go. We don't have the unzip file for this because we never installed it. So we do have this mounted, which is good. We can make sure of that by hitting DF. And oh, it's not mounted. So it's a good thing I checked. So let's mount that. Dev cd-rom. Now we can say yum install unzip. Yes. We're good. Now let's unzip that host file. Let's run the script. There we go. Let's send that file back to W01 so we can look at it. So we're going to say root of W01. And that's all we need for SO1 for now. And then we're just going to say Firefox temp SO1 report. And there we go. So let's take a look at this just to make sure that everything is the way we want it. Expand it. So host name is SO1. So we ran this from SO1, which is perfect. NFS startup. So we saw that we have 0 and 1 is off, 2 to 5 is on, and 6 is off, which is exactly what we want. NFS connection from W01, and it shows that we have established a connection with NFS. That's perfect. The scratch in exports is showing us what we wrote. So we said scratch means everyone has rewrite access on W01, and there's no root squash, which means root of W01 will have the same privileges and power as the root of SO1. So that's perfect. And we did test files, and we can see that Bill, Carlos, and root were able to write in here no problem. Then it says accounting and exports, and we can see the NFS shares is here, and like I told you, all we have to do is W01 read write, because this is one that we're using groups to make sure that if you're in a group you can access it, if you're not you can't access it. So we don't have to worry about saying root squash, because it'll automatically assume it, because root was not part of the accounting group. So this is perfect. That's exactly what you want. Then when it comes to permissions and ownership on an accounting side, we're going to see that we have this. And what this is showing is that basically root has no access. It's just accounting. So this is fine, and we can see that because when we see the test files in accounting, we can see Bill and Carlos were able to do something, but root was not. So this is fine. This is just showing that we basically use, see that S? That's that set UIB bit that we did. So you remember when we said change mod at 2770? That's going to prevent us, or that's going to show this S, which is going to prevent people that are not in the group from posting, and everything's going to show up as accounting. So accounting owns this. So we did everything good here. If you have that S in there, that means you use the change mod 2770 or whatever you said. But if you have that 2 in front of the 3 permissions, then you're good. So like I said, test files are in here, so that is all good. The pub in exports is in there, so we can see W01 everyone can read write. But we did was all squash, so that everyone showed up as W01 guest. So we have the anon UID and the anon GID in here as 550, because that's what we called it, or that's what the UID was that we gave for W01 guest. And then when it comes to permission and ownership on pub, we can see that once again I used the the 2777, and that's why we have that S here. That's that set UID bit, but everyone can read write. The only thing is you're going to see that everyone is going to show up as W01 guest, and that is what we can see right here. Everyone was able to write something, but we see everyone as W01 guest. So that was perfect. That is how you do it. Again, if you're confused about it, do not worry. I'm here to help in any way that I can. Just message me and I'd be happy to help. So hopefully this helped you, and hopefully you're able to figure this out. And again, I really hope you guys do really good on your test. I will try to make more videos down the road, but I'm going to take a break for it for a couple weeks, and then I'll get back at it. All right. Have a great day. Again, have an amazing test. Get some great grades. Let me know how it goes, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.